Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, coming to you from beautiful Key West, Florida, but I could also say I'm coming to you from a beautiful new world, nothing less than a civilizationalist realignment happening as we speak, and I have to say this could not have come a moment too soon given the utter reckless provocation of the Biden administration in their last days when they went full scorched earth to leave Trump with the biggest international mess they possibly could when he assumed office. But by God's grace, that did not work. Biden's green light to send American-made and operated attack-M missiles into the heart of Russia was beyond reckless. It was an absurd and needless, provocative escalation. But we predicted that President Putin would not take the bait. He's engaged in this entire operation over the last 2 years with a steeled and steady resolve. He's refused any and all distractions, and as a result, the Russian Federation has taken over 20% of Ukraine, the eastern Russian part of Ukraine, and has fully annexed that into the Russian Federation and has promised they will never relinquish that territory that they fought and bled for. And the globalist powers that be, led by Biden, simply could not comprehend that another major international power bloc had risen up and effectively challenged the liberal international order that had ruled the world unimpeded and unchallenged for the last 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union. And my concern over these last 2 years, since February of 2022, was that the total arrogance of our globalist elite in DC and Brussels and their total inability to even comprehend how their global power was being effectively resisted and indeed defeated was going to begin a series of escalations that could ultimately result in a full-blown breakout of World War III. And the attack-M missiles that are owned and operated by American forces, the attack-M missiles being sent into the heart of Russia from Ukraine, looked as if it could be the start of just such a disastrous and cataclysmic escalation. But by God's grace and because of what you did on November 5th, that nightmare scenario has been officially averted. President Trump has announced that he has personally spoken with Putin, something, again, the Biden administration actually refused to do. He spoke at length with Putin, and Trump has announced, as a result, a tectonic shift in U.S. policy. The Trump administration has made an official declaration that a return to 2014 borders is completely unrealistic. It's simply not going to happen. They've announced that NATO membership for Ukraine is off the table. That was until now a non-negotiable for both Biden and Brussels. Again, if you can believe it, Biden and Brussels insisted on Ukraine's NATO membership, which was the very thing that triggered this conflict in the first place. Again, just beyond reprehensible. And Trump has affirmed that only European troops would be considered for peacekeeping forces in the region, no American troops whatsoever, and most importantly, these forces would not be covered under Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth confirmed precisely this at his first trip abroad as Secretary of Defense. Speaking in Brussels at a NATO summit, Hegseth made it very clear that it is the policy of the president that this conflict will end, but it is going to end, more or less, on Russia's terms. In fact, Trump himself even said he frankly didn't care if Ukraine remained Ukrainian or if it was Russian. He actually said that. And he confirmed, as did President Putin, that the two leaders would meet on an official visit, most likely in Saudi Arabia, to begin a process of what looks like a reset on Russian-American relations. Now, there's so much here. There's so many takeaways. First and foremost, let's give a little pat on the back for this channel and other channels like the Duran, Alex and Alexander over at the Duran. From the very beginning of this conflict, we took the very unpopular opinion at the time that this invasion of Russia into Ukraine was inevitable given NATO's incessant eastward expansion. Every single Russian leader since Gorbachev onwards warned NATO not to do this, and Putin made it unmistakably clear back in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference that Ukraine and Georgia were the red lines. If NATO encroached on either one of those red lines, that's it, all bets are off. And so that's why John Mearsheimer, the University of Chicago, predicted back in 2014 that we were headed for a major confrontation between NATO and Russia, and of course he unfortunately turned out to be right. But this channel, as well as the Duran, made it very clear from the very beginning, there was only one way this conflict was going to end, and it was going to end when Russia says it ends. Russia, despite all of the Western media propaganda that we now know was bought and paid for by USAID, Russia's always been in control of the situation. They've always dominated the battlefield, and this was not going to end until Russia says so. And it will be done on Russia's terms. We've been saying that for over 2 years now. We took a lot of heat for that, but now I believe we've all been exonerated fully on that. So for me, that's the first big takeaway. We got this conflict right. The real provocateur was NATO. Russia responded. They planned for that response for over a decade, and they're getting precisely what they want out of all of this. The second big takeaway is what peace in the region will mean politically here at home. And I think Scott Adams made a very good point. He said that if Trump shows it was always easy to end the Ukraine-Russia war, and things are heading that way, whatever's left of the Democrat base will collapse. And I think he's right. I mean, this is just another win among many being racked up by the Trump administration, but even more so, it's a win that averted World War III. So I think this is going to further alienate the Democrats from the new populist mainstream who voted overwhelmingly for an end to an interventionist foreign policy in the United States. And that leads us, I think, to the biggest takeaway. It's that it looks like we're witnessing nothing less than a truly new world order, what I like to call a renewed world order, centered around a civilizational realignment happening. Just a few years ago, the world was governed by a single sole superpower after the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States. And because that single sole superpower used that status and privilege as an opportunity to force other nations to become liberal, the world order for the last 30 years has been known as the liberal international order, a unipolar world governed by a single superpower devoted to using the power to liberalize the world. Secretary of State Marco Rubio just said a few days ago that order, that unipolar world order, was a historical anomaly, and that it was inevitable that eventually multiple great powers would rise up and reassert their civilizational sovereignty in the world. So according to Rubio, it is now the official position of the Trump White House that such a multipolar world order has risen. And now with Pete Hegseth's announcement at the NATO summit, that multipolar world has indeed been confirmed. The world is now being reorganized around rising civilizational spheres: Orthodox Russia, Confucian China, Hindu India, Ottoman Turkey, Sunni-centered Saudi Arabia. And these rising power blocks are bringing about, to use Kissinger's expression, the end of an era. Liberalism will not alone determine the future of humanity. Liberal principles are being officially rejected by the new civilizationalist international system. And that means that we now have a new opportunity for a rapprochement between Russia and the United States. And that's exactly what it sounds like Trump wants to pursue. Now, it's going to be interesting to see with the rise of civilizationalism if something akin to Ernesto Araújo's version for Russia and the United States comes to pass. Araújo is a Brazilian scholar. He was the foreign minister of Brazil under President Jair Bolsonaro. And he actually made the argument for a new Christendom, a new world realignment around the three biggest Christian nations, the US, Brazil, and Russia, which would unite the South American civilizational sphere with the North American civilizational sphere and the Eurasian civilizational sphere around the common core of the Christian faith. And it would also signify the realignment of the three great branches of Christianity: Catholic Brazil, Protestant states, and Eastern Orthodox Russia. Again, we're all a bit early in this process, but if the civilizationalist dynamics that we're seeing continue, there's no reason to think that we won't see a new world order, again, a renewed world order centered on Christianity emerge in the very near future. Absolutely amazing stuff. God bless.